Sarah Martinez stared at the cream-colored invitation in her trembling hands, reading the elegant script for the third time that morning. Westfield High School Class of 2008 15-year reunion. The golden seal at the bottom seemed to mock her as memories flooded back like a dam bursting open. She remembered walking those hallways with her head down, books clutched tightly against her chest, trying to become invisible. The whispers followed her everywhere. "There goes nothing, girl," they would say, thinking she couldn't hear. "Sarah the Nobody." The nickname had stuck like glue from freshman year when she'd failed to make any sports teams, couldn't afford the trendy clothes, and spent lunch periods alone in the library. Her family had struggled financially after her father's accident at the construction site. Her mother worked double shifts at the diner just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. While her classmates talked about college prep courses and SAT scores, Sarah worked afternoons at the local grocery store, bagging groceries and mopping floors to help with household expenses. The popular kids had made her life miserable. Jessica Chen, the head cheerleader with her perfect blonde highlights and designer purses, would laugh when Sarah walked by. "Look, it's nothing girl again," she'd announce to her circle of friends. "I wonder if she'll amount to anything after graduation." The boys were no better. Brad Thompson, the star quarterback, once knocked her books out of her hands in front of the entire cafeteria. "Oops, sorry, nothing," he had said with a smirk, not bothering to help her pick them up. Even the teachers seemed to overlook her. When she raised her hand in class, they would look right through her as if she wasn't there. Her guidance counselor had been particularly crushing during their senior year meeting. "Sarah, you need to be realistic about your future," Mrs. Patterson had said, barely looking up from her paperwork. "Not everyone is cut out for college. Have you considered vocational training, maybe becoming a secretary or working in retail?" The words had burned into her memory. She remembered sitting in that tiny office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, feeling smaller and smaller with each suggestion. Her dreams of becoming a pilot seemed ridiculous in that moment. Who was she kidding? Girls from broken families in small towns didn't become pilots. They became whatever was expected of them, which in her case seemed to be nothing at all. Graduation day had been a blur of relief and determination. While her classmates celebrated with parties and beach trips, Sarah had already enlisted in the Army. She remembered her mother crying at the kitchen table when she signed the papers. "Are you sure about this, Mija?" her mother had asked, worry lines creasing her forehead. "The military is so dangerous." Sarah had hugged her mother tight that day, promising to write every week and call whenever possible. What she didn't tell her was that the military felt like her only shot at proving everyone wrong. It was her escape route from the small town that had labeled her as worthless. Basic training at Fort Benning had been brutal. The drill sergeant screamed at her until her ears rang, made her do push-ups until her arms gave out, and pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't nothing girl. She was Private Martinez, and her worth was measured by her determination, not her family's bank account or her social status. The other recruits came from all walks of life. There was Marcus from Detroit, who had grown up in foster care. Kelly from rural Montana, whose family had lost their ranch to drought. Ahmed from New York, whose parents had immigrated with nothing but hope. None of them cared about high school hierarchies or designer clothes. They only cared about having each other's backs and completing their mission. Sarah discovered she had a natural aptitude for aviation during aptitude testing. The recruiter who had initially processed her paperwork called her into his office one afternoon. "Martinez, your scores are off the charts," Sergeant Williams had said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Have you ever considered flight training?" Her heart had nearly stopped. Flying had been her secret dream since childhood, sparked by watching old war movies with her grandfather before he passed away. She used to build model airplanes in her bedroom, dreaming of soaring through clouds and seeing the world from above. But dreams were for people who could afford them, or so she had always believed. "I can't afford flight training, Sergeant," she had replied quietly, assuming that was the end of the conversation. Sergeant Williams had smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since arriving. "Kid, Uncle Sam is going to pay for every hour of your training. You've got the scores and the attitude. The question is, do you have the guts?" The months that followed were the most challenging and rewarding of her entire life. Ground school pushed her intellectually in ways high school never had. She studied aerodynamics, navigation, weather patterns, and aircraft systems until her eyes burned from reading. Her instructors were demanding but fair, treating her with the respect she'd never received from her high school teachers. Flight training was even more intense. Her first time in a cockpit, her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the controls. The instructor, Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez, had been patient but firm. "Martinez, you're thinking too much," he'd said during one particularly difficult lesson. "Trust your training and trust yourself. The bird wants to fly. Your job is to help it." Slowly, gradually, flying became second nature. The helicopter responded to her touch like an extension of her own body. She learned to navigate by instruments in zero visibility, to perform emergency landings in hostile terrain, and to maintain her composure under pressure that would break most people. Her fellow trainees became her chosen family. They studied together, failed together, succeeded together, and pushed each other to be better every single day. When one person struggled, the whole group rallied around them. It was the opposite of everything she'd experienced in high school. The day she received her wings was the proudest moment of her life. Her mother had flown out for the ceremony, tears streaming down her face as she pinned the aviation badge on Sarah's dress uniform. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You did it, Mija, you really did it." But that was just the beginning. Sarah's first deployment took her to Afghanistan, where she flew medical evacuation missions in a A-60 Black Hawk. She saved lives daily, pulling wounded soldiers from dangerous situations and racing against time to get them to medical facilities. The work was dangerous and emotionally draining, but it gave her a sense of purpose she'd never felt before. Her commanding officers quickly recognized her exceptional skills and leadership potential. She was recommended for advanced training and specialized missions. Each commendation and promotion felt like another step away from the girl they'd called nothing back in Westfield. Years passed in a blur of deployments, training exercises, and advanced courses. Sarah earned her college degree through military education programs, studying between missions and during brief stateside assignments. She learned to speak Arabic and Spanish fluently, studied international relations and military strategy, and became an expert in multiple aircraft systems. The transition to Apache helicopter training was the most challenging yet. The AH-64 Apache was a sophisticated attack helicopter, requiring split-second decision-making and nerves of steel. The training was so intense that many experienced pilots washed out, but Sarah thrived under pressure, earning the respect of instructors who had initially been skeptical about her abilities. Now, 15 years after graduation, she held the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 4. She had logged thousands of flight hours, served multiple combat deployments, and earned commendations for valor and exceptional service. Her military record was spotless, her reputation impeccable, and her skills unquestionable. The invitation still sat on her kitchen counter, next to her military awards and a framed photo of her Apache helicopter crew. She had been putting off her response for weeks, unsure whether she wanted to face the people who had made her feel so small all those years ago. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her best friend and fellow pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Walsh, calling from their base in Texas. "Sarah, please tell me you're going to that reunion," Jennifer said without preamble. "You've been obsessing over that invitation for weeks." Sarah sighed, running her fingers through her short brown hair. "I don't know, Jen. What's the point? It's just going to be the same people talking about the same old high school drama." "The point is that you're not the same person you were then," Jennifer replied firmly. "You're a decorated combat veteran, an Apache pilot, and one of the most respected officers I know. Those people have no idea what you've accomplished." "Maybe that's better," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe some things are better left in the past." Jennifer was quiet for a moment before responding. "Sarah, I've watched you face down enemy fire without flinching. I've seen you save lives under impossible conditions. Are you really going to let a bunch of high school bullies make you hide?" The words hit home. Sarah had faced Taliban fighters, survived helicopter crashes, and led missions in the most dangerous parts of the world. Why was she letting the memory of teenage cruelty paralyze her now? "Besides," Jennifer continued with a mischievous tone, "didn't you tell me your unit is doing that aerial demonstration next weekend? The one right near your hometown?" Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what Jennifer was suggesting. The demonstration was part of a military appreciation event being held at the county fairgrounds, just 20 minutes from Westfield. Her Apache squadron was scheduled to perform precision flying demonstrations for the public. "Jen, that's crazy," Sarah said, but her voice carried a hint of excitement. Crazy like a fox, Jennifer replied. What time does your reunion start? The Westfield Country Club buzzed with nervous energy as former classmates filtered into the elegantly decorated ballroom. Soft jazz music played in the background while people clustered around name tags, squinting at old yearbook photos and trying to match faces with memories from 15 years ago. Jessica Chen Williams stood near the bar, her designer dress perfectly fitted and her smile practiced from years of corporate networking events. She had married well to a successful investment banker and lived in a sprawling suburban mansion with manicured lawns and a 3-car garage. Her conversation consisted mostly of humble bragging about her children's private school accomplishments and her husband's latest promotion. I just can't believe how some people have let themselves go, she whispered to her friend Madison, nodding toward a former classmate who had gained weight over the years. I mean, I know we're all getting older, but some of us still take care of ourselves. Brad Thompson had indeed let himself go, his once athletic frame now soft around the middle from years of beer and sedentary office work. He worked in insurance sales and spent most of his free time reminiscing about his high school football glory days. His wife had divorced him 2 years earlier, taking half his assets and custody of their 2 children. Remember when I threw for 3 touchdowns against Central High? He was telling anyone who would listen. Coach said I could have played college ball if I'd applied myself more. The reunion committee had decorated the ballroom with blown-up photos from their senior year, including candid shots from the hallways and cafeteria. In several of the background images, a solitary figure could be spotted sitting alone or walking with her head down. Most people didn't even notice these glimpses of Sarah Martinez, but those who did remembered her with a mixture of indifference and mild curiosity. Whatever happened to that quiet girl? Asked Tom Peterson, a former class president who now worked as a middle manager at a paper company. What was her name? Sandra? Sally? Sarah something, replied Amanda Foster, who had been student council vice president and now taught elementary school. I heard she joined the military, probably ended up as a secretary or something. Mrs. Patterson, their former guidance counselor, had been invited as a special guest. Now retired, she moved slowly through the crowd, accepting grateful thanks from former students who credited her with helping them choose the right colleges. She had no memory of discouraging a young girl from pursuing her dreams of flying. The evening progressed with the usual reunion activities. A slideshow of yearbook photos projected onto a large screen, showing the class of 2008 in their teenage glory. Awards were given for categories like Traveled the Farthest and Most Children and Most Successful Business Owner. During the slideshow, Sarah's senior portrait appeared briefly on screen. She looked young and uncertain, her smile forced, and her eyes holding a sadness that most of her classmates had never bothered to notice. The image passed quickly, generating no comment from the audience. I wonder if anyone from our class is in the military, someone commented during dinner. That would be kind of cool. I doubt it, replied Jessica. Most of the smart kids went to college. The military is for people who don't have other options. The conversation moved on to other topics. People shared updates about careers, families, and accomplishments. The popular kids had generally done well for themselves, though not as spectacularly as they had once expected. The quiet kids who had been overlooked in high school had often surprised everyone with their success in adult life. Around 9 o'clock, someone noticed a distant rumbling sound coming from outside. At first, people ignored it, assuming it was thunder or traffic from the nearby highway. But the sound grew louder and more distinct, developing into the unmistakable whir of helicopter rotors. Is there a hospital nearby? Someone asked, thinking it might be a medical helicopter. The sound grew closer, then seemed to hover directly overhead. The music stopped as everyone looked up at the ceiling, puzzled by the intensity of the noise. The chandelier was actually vibrating from the rotor wash of whatever aircraft was hovering above the country club. That's way too loud for a medical helicopter, said Jim Martinez, a former classmate who had become an aerospace engineer. That sounds military. Through the large windows facing the golf course, people could see bright lights moving in the darkness. The mysterious aircraft appeared to be circling the building in a slow, deliberate pattern. Maybe it's part of that military demonstration they're having at the fairgrounds this weekend, suggested someone else. But why would they be flying around here? The hotel manager appeared, looking flustered and slightly annoyed. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disturbance. We have a helicopter requesting permission to land on our back lawn. This is highly unusual, and I'm not sure what protocol to follow." The reunion attendees looked at each other in confusion. Why would a military helicopter want to land at their high school reunion? "Did anyone invite someone in the military?" asked the reunion committee chairman, scanning the crowd for answers. The crowd migrated toward the windows overlooking the golf course, where they could see the helicopter more clearly. Even in the darkness, illuminated by the aircraft's powerful lights, it was clearly a military attack helicopter. The distinctive shape of an Apache was unmistakable to anyone who had seen war movies or military documentaries. "Holy cow, that's an Apache helicopter," breathed Jim Martinez. "Those things cost $30 million each. What's it doing here?" The helicopter executed a perfect landing on the 18th green, its rotors creating a windstorm that bent the manicured grass flat and sent golf course maintenance equipment tumbling. The engines wound down gradually, and the rotors slowed to a stop. In the sudden silence that followed, the reunion attendees pressed against the windows, straining to see what would happen next. The helicopter sat like a sleeping predator on the golf course, its dark silhouette both beautiful and intimidating in the landscape lighting. A figure emerged from the cockpit, dropping down from the aircraft with practiced ease. Even at a distance, they could tell it was a pilot in full flight gear, helmet tucked under one arm and moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. "Whoever that is, they've got guts," admitted Brad Thompson. "You don't just drop an Apache helicopter onto a golf course unless you know what you're doing." The pilot walked across the golf course toward the country club, their flight suit and equipment clearly visible in the outdoor lighting. As the figure approached the building, people began to make out more details. The pilot appeared to be of average height and build, carrying themselves with military bearing and purpose. "It's a woman," someone observed as the pilot came closer. "A female Apache pilot, how cool is that?" Jessica rolled her eyes. "Great, some military show-off trying to make an entrance. This is supposed to be about our class, not some stranger's attempt to be dramatic." But as the pilot approached the main entrance, something nagged at several people in the crowd. There was something familiar about the way she walked, something that triggered half-forgotten memories from high school hallways. The hotel manager met the pilot at the front entrance, and they could see him gesturing and speaking animatedly. The pilot showed him some kind of identification, and the manager's demeanor immediately changed from annoyance to respect. He was actually standing at attention, nodding repeatedly as the pilot spoke. "She must be pretty high-ranking," observed someone in the crowd. "Look at how that manager is treating her." The pilot entered the building, and the reunion attendees hurried back to their positions in the ballroom, suddenly self-conscious about their obvious curiosity. The room buzzed with whispered speculation about who this mysterious military pilot might be and why she had chosen their reunion for such a dramatic entrance. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the ballroom, the distinctive sound of military boots on marble flooring. The conversations gradually died down as everyone turned toward the entrance, waiting to see who would walk through those doors. The pilot appeared in the doorway, still wearing her flight suit and carrying her helmet. She paused for a moment, surveying the room full of people who were all staring at her with curiosity and confusion. Her hair was shorter than it had been in high school regulation length for military service. Her face had lost the softness of youth, replaced by the confidence and strength that came from years of facing life-and-death situations. Her posture was straight, her gaze steady, and her presence commanded attention in a way that her teenage self never could have imagined. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The pilot's eyes moved slowly across the crowd, taking in faces she hadn't seen in 15 years. Some people looked exactly as she remembered them. Others had changed dramatically. But the expressions were familiar, the same mixture of curiosity and judgment she remembered from high school hallways. "Good evening," the pilot said, her voice clear and confident. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Jessica stepped forward, her social training kicking in despite her confusion. Hello, I'm sorry, but this is a private event for our high school reunion. Are you looking for someone specific?" The pilot smiled, an expression that held secrets and stories that none of them could imagine. "Actually, I think I'm in the right place. Westfield High School, class of 2008, 15-year reunion. Is that correct? Yes, but... Jessica trailed off, studying the pilot's face more carefully. There was something familiar about those eyes, something that tugged at memories she couldn't quite place. Then I'm definitely in the right place, the pilot replied. My name is Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Martinez. I believe I was invited to this reunion. The silence that followed was so complete that they could hear the air conditioning humming and someone's watch ticking. Every face in the room reflected the same dawning recognition, the same impossible realization. Sarah Martinez, nothing girl, the quiet kid who sat alone at lunch and worked at the grocery store, the girl they had dismissed and forgotten and written off as destined for failure. She was standing in their reunion wearing the uniform of an Apache helicopter pilot, having just landed a $30 million aircraft on their golf course like it was the most natural thing in the world. The ballroom remained frozen in shocked silence as Sarah Martinez stood in the doorway, her presence transforming the entire atmosphere of the reunion. The confident woman in military uniform bore little resemblance to the quiet, overlooked girl they remembered from high school corridors. Jessica Chen Williams felt her carefully constructed smile faltering as memories crashed back like waves. This couldn't be the same Sarah who had cleaned tables in the cafeteria during lunch periods, who had worn the same 3 outfits rotated throughout the school year, who had been invisible to everyone who mattered. Sarah, Jessica's voice came out as barely a whisper. Sarah Martinez. Hello, Jessica, Sarah replied calmly, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of commanding respect in life-or-death situations. You look exactly the same. The comment wasn't entirely complimentary, though Sarah delivered it without malice. Jessica had indeed maintained her high school appearance through expensive treatments and procedures, but she had also maintained the same superficial priorities and judgmental attitudes that had defined her teenage years. Brad Thompson pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with alcohol and embarrassment. No way, no freaking way, you actually became a pilot. His voice carried disbelief mixed with something that might have been respect. An Apache pilot, Sarah corrected gently. Attack helicopter. I've been flying combat missions for the past 8 years. The crowd began to murmur as the full implications of her presence sank in. This wasn't just someone who had joined the military. This was someone who had achieved one of the most challenging and prestigious positions in military aviation. Apache pilots were elite warriors, requiring exceptional skill, judgment, and courage. Tom Peterson, the former class president, stepped forward with his politician's instinct for damage control. Sarah, wow, congratulations on your service. We had no idea. We lost touch with so many people after graduation. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a hint of amusement. Actually, I sent my contact information to the reunion committee 3 months ago when I received the invitation. I wanted to make sure they could reach me if there were any updates. The reunion committee chairman, Mark Stevens, went pale as he realized the implication. Sarah's military address and rank would have been clearly visible on any correspondence. They had simply ignored her response, assuming she wasn't important enough to warrant special attention. We must have missed that, Mark stammered. Mail gets lost sometimes, you know how it is. Of course, Sarah replied diplomatically. These things happen. Mrs. Patterson, the former guidance counselor, approached with hesitant steps. Her face showed dawning recognition mixed with something that might have been shame. Sarah, is that really you, dear? My goodness, you look so different. Hello, Mrs. Patterson, Sarah said, her voice warming slightly. Yes, I suppose I do look different. The military has a way of changing people. Mrs. Patterson's hands fluttered nervously as she tried to reconcile the confident officer before her with her memories of the uncertain teenager she had discouraged from pursuing her dreams. I remember you wanted to be a pilot. I'm so glad you. I always knew you had potential. The lie hung in the air between them, transparent to everyone present. Sarah chose not to challenge it directly, though her slight smile suggested she remembered their conversation very differently. Thank you, Sarah said simply. Your advice about being realistic actually helped me a great deal. It taught me that sometimes the most important person to believe in yourself is you. Amanda Foster, the former student council vice president who now taught elementary school, found her voice. Sarah, this is incredible, what you've accomplished. It's amazing. I teach kids now, and I tell them they can be anything they want to be. You're living proof of that. That's kind of you to say, Sarah replied. Though I think it's more accurate to say I'm proof that hard work and determination can overcome other people's low expectations. The comment was delivered without bitterness, but its impact was unmistakable. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, remembering their own roles in creating those low expectations. Jim Martinez, the aerospace engineer, stepped forward with genuine enthusiasm. Sarah, I have to ask, what's it like flying an Apache? I work with military aircraft systems, but I've never met an actual Apache pilot. For the first time since entering the room, Sarah's expression brightened with genuine pleasure. It's incredible. The Apache is the most sophisticated attack helicopter ever built. The helmet-mounted display system lets you target weapons by looking at your objective. The aircraft responds like an extension of your own body. As she spoke about flying, the room could hear the passion in her voice. This wasn't just a job for her. It was a calling that had transformed her life. Her technical knowledge and enthusiasm were evident as she described complex flight systems and combat procedures. I've logged over 3,000 flight hours, she continued. Multiple combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. I've been part of medical evacuation missions, close air support for ground troops, and reconnaissance operations in hostile territory. The crowd listened with growing amazement as she casually mentioned experiences that sounded like something from a movie. Saving wounded soldiers under enemy fire, navigating through mountain passes in zero visibility, coordinating with special operations forces on classified missions. How many people know how to fly those things? Asked someone from the back of the crowd. There are fewer than 800 qualified Apache pilots in the entire U.S. Army, Sarah replied. It's a small, elite community. The training is intense, and the standards are extremely high. Jessica found her voice again, though it sounded strained. That's really impressive, Sarah. I had no idea the military had opportunities like that. There are incredible opportunities for people willing to work hard and prove themselves, Sarah agreed. The military doesn't care about your high school social status or your family's bank account. They care about your performance and your character. The words carried an obvious subtext that made several people in the room squirm. In high school, Sarah had been judged by her family's financial struggles and her lack of social connections. The military had judged her by her abilities and determination. Brad Thompson, perhaps trying to reclaim some of his lost social standing, raised his voice. That's all great, Sarah, but don't you think landing a military helicopter at our reunion is a bit much? I mean, it's kind of showing off, isn't it? The room went quiet again, everyone recognizing the challenge in his words. It was the same bullying tone he had used in high school, though now it sounded petty and desperate coming from a middle-aged man facing his own failures. Sarah looked at him steadily for a long moment before responding. You're absolutely right, Brad. It is showing off. She paused, letting the admission hang in the air. But after 15 years of being told I was nothing, of being dismissed and overlooked and written off, I figured one evening of showing off was acceptable. Her words were delivered calmly, without anger or defensiveness. She was simply stating facts, owning her choices, and refusing to apologize for her success. Besides, she continued with a slight smile, my unit was already in the area for a military appreciation event this weekend. The Apache needed to relocate for tomorrow's demonstration anyway. It seemed like an efficient use of resources. The practicality of her explanation somehow made her entrance even more impressive. She hadn't gone out of her way to show off. She had simply incorporated their reunion into her existing military duties with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to command decisions. Mrs. Patterson spoke up again, her voice shaky. Sarah, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your potential. I should have encouraged your dreams instead of trying to limit them. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah said gently, you gave me exactly what I needed. You taught me that if I wanted to prove people wrong, I had to do it myself. No one else was going to hand me my dreams. The reunion committee chairman cleared his throat nervously. Sarah, we'd love to hear more about your experiences. Would you be willing to say a few words to the class? Maybe we could add a special presentation to tonight's program. Sarah considered the request for a moment. I appreciate the invitation, but I don't think that's necessary. I didn't come here to give a speech or to make anyone feel bad about the past. Then why did you come? Asked Madison, Jessica's friend, her voice carrying genuine curiosity. Sarah's expression softened as she looked around the room at faces she had once known so well. I came because this place was part of my journey, even if it wasn't a happy part. The person you knew in high school died a long time ago, but she was necessary for me to become who I am now. She gestured toward the window where her helicopter sat on the golf course, its presence both impossible and undeniable. That aircraft represents everything I've accomplished. Every mission I've flown, every life I've saved, every limit I've exceeded. But it also represents every day I spent feeling invisible in these halls. The room was absolutely silent as she continued. You called me nothing, girl, and maybe I was nothing then, but nothing can become something extraordinary if it's given the chance to grow. Jessica stepped forward, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Sarah, I'm so sorry. We were terrible to you. We were just kids, but that's no excuse for the way we treated you. You were kids, Sarah agreed. And kids can be cruel without understanding the consequences. I'm not here for apologies or revenge. I'm here because I wanted to close this chapter of my life properly. She looked around the room one more time, making eye contact with faces that had once had the power to make her feel worthless. I want you all to know that you don't define me anymore. You probably never did, but it took me years to understand that. Tom Peterson raised his hand slightly, like they were still in class. Sarah, what advice would you give to kids today who might be going through what you went through? Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. I would tell them that high school is not real life. The people who seem important now might not matter at all in 10 years. The person you are at 17 is not the person you have to be at 32. She paused, her eyes focusing on something beyond the room, perhaps remembering her own 17-year-old self. Most importantly, I would tell them that other people's opinions of you are not facts. They're just opinions, and opinions can be wrong. Amanda Foster wiped away a tear. That's beautiful advice, Sarah. I'm going to share that with my students. I hope it helps someone, Sarah replied. Though I suspect the kids who need to hear it most are usually too busy surviving to listen. The conversation continued for another hour as people gradually relaxed and began asking genuine questions about Sarah's experiences. She shared stories of her training, her deployments, and her fellow service members with the kind of detail that only comes from someone who has lived through extraordinary experiences. As the evening wound down, people began approaching her individually to apologize, to congratulate her, or simply to express amazement at her transformation. Some were sincere, others were clearly motivated by social obligation or curiosity. Sarah accepted all of them with equal grace. Finally, as the reunion officially ended, Sarah prepared to leave. She shook hands with classmates, accepted business cards from people who suddenly wanted to stay in touch, and graciously deflected invitations to after-parties and continued celebrations. Mrs. Patterson was the last to approach her, walking slowly and leaning heavily on a cane. Sarah, dear, I need you to know something. I've been a guidance counselor for 35 years, and I've given a lot of advice to a lot of students. Most of it was helpful, I believe, but some of it was wrong. She looked directly into Sarah's eyes, her own filled with regret. What I told you about being realistic, about limiting your dreams. That was fear talking, not wisdom. I was afraid you would get hurt if you aimed too high. But I realize now that I was really afraid of taking responsibility for encouraging something that might fail. Sarah listened patiently as the older woman continued. You've taught me something important tonight. Sometimes the most realistic thing to do is to ignore realistic advice and pursue impossible dreams anyway. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah said softly, you weren't entirely wrong. Not everyone who dreams of flying gets to fly. The difference is that you helped me understand I would have to earn it myself without expecting help or encouragement from others. In a way, that made me stronger. As she walked back across the golf course toward her helicopter, Sarah felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The conversations had been difficult but necessary, like properly cleaning an old wound so it could finally heal completely. She performed her pre-flight inspection with practiced efficiency, checking systems and controls that had become as familiar to her as breathing. The Apache responded immediately to her touch as she brought the engines online, the powerful turbines winding up with their characteristic whine. Through the helicopter's canopy, she could see faces pressed against the country club windows, watching her prepare for departure. They were no longer the faces of her tormentors or judges. They were simply people she had once known, frozen in a moment of recognition and perhaps understanding. As the Apache lifted off the golf course and climbed into the night sky, Sarah felt the weight of the past finally lifting away. Below her, the lights of Westfield grew smaller and less significant with each foot of altitude. Her radio crackled with air traffic control instructions, guiding her back to base and tomorrow's responsibilities. She had missions to plan, troops to lead, and aircraft to maintain. The reunion was over, but her real life was just beginning another chapter. Years later, some of her former classmates would tell their own children about the night Nothing Girl returned as an Apache pilot, landing a $30 million helicopter on their golf course, and teaching them that labels are just words, and words have only the power you choose to give them. But Sarah never looked back. She had found her sky, and she intended to keep flying.